Yeah, all right. So let me tell you what's been happening over 13 weeks since we have not gathered. You probably know if you follow us on Facebook. When the city needed a place for the homeless community to go when the governor gave the stay-at-home order, when the city realized that ministry with community was at capacity, when the city realized the gospel mission was at capacity, the city only called one place because the city knew that that one place that they called was a place that was a home to the lost, the least, and the lonely. They called your church, The River, to open up its building to be a stay-at-home shelter. The church was doing churchy things even when the church wasn't gathering, and it makes me proud to be a part of your church. Way to go, church. And you need to know when the city said, okay, thanks for opening up your doors. What do we owe you? What's rent going to be per week? I knew what you all would want me to say. You know what I told them? It rhymes with hero. Zero. Yeah, you got it. And the city was wonderfully blown out of the waters with the generosity of your church. And I want you to know that I am proud of you because you are a church that welcomes the lost, the least, and the lonely. The church has been doing church things even though the church hasn't gathered as the church. Did you know I'm also proud of your pastoral staff, right? You got Brad, our pastor of discipleship. You got Shayla, our pastor of worship. You got Mark right over here, our pastor of students, right? There's supposed to be a fourth one. Where's that fourth one? Anybody know? Mallory is great with child, kind of like Mary on Christmas, right? She is large with child, but appropriately so, right? Nothing inappropriate, right? The four pastors of this church, myself included in that, these wonderful people, it makes me proud to call them friends and colleagues, over the 13 weeks have produced over 80 discipleship videos so that we can be trained in the ways of the Lord. That to me is phenomenal. The church has been doing churchy things even though the church hasn't gathered. Your pastoral staff has been working hard in spite of the obstacles, right? When I went to seminary, I actually had a class on what to do during a global pandemic, so I knew exactly what to do. Thank you. But the other four staff, they had no clue. Fortunately, they had me to guide them through the way. That is so not true. We were all confused. We all didn't know what we were doing. And yet God has done work through this. But you know what? It's not just the pastoral staff of this church. It's the support staff. The supporting staff of this place has done remarkable things to keep the church up and running so that God's kingdom could advance even in the midst of a pandemic. And it's not just people who work at a church. It's crazy people like you, who have made the church do churchy things even though the church hasn't gathered. So many of you have been a part of Zoom Bible studies or Zoom prayer meetings, right? The prayer team has been meeting 3 days a week. There's Sunday schools that have been going on. There's women groups that have been going on. Y'all have been doing the work of the church even though the church hasn't been able to gather as the church, and it makes me proud to be a part of your community. So thank you for letting me be a part of your community. I am proud of this church. How many of y'all missed gathering over the last 13 weeks? Of course you have. I had one introvert come up to me after the first service. He says, man, even I reached my limit. He said, after 8 weeks, I knew I needed some people. And I'm telling you, even the introverted in this community realized that, man, they needed community. And it reminds me of what John said. We're not in the Gospel of John, right? If you knew, we've been working through the Gospel of John since January of 2018. Man, I had hair back then when we started. You guys remember that? That's not true. But we're not going to talk about the Gospel of John today. Rather, we're going to look at another book that the author John wrote, and that is the book of Revelation. So we're going to go back to the John by looking at Revelation chapter 7, verse 11, shall we? He says, after this, he'd just seen some amazing things. John says, after this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count. Somebody say a great multitude. Thank you, you four. I appreciate that. Salim, I missed you, man. Look at that. Yeah. Somebody else say a great multitude. John is giving us a vision of things to come when we get to glory, when eternity is fully upon us. And the first thing he says in our text today, that the gathering of God's people is what's going to be the norm when we get to heaven. Some of you have been longing for these days when we could gather again. Even though it's a bit weird and not normal, you know that it's wonderful because you have eternity written on your hearts. And in eternity, the multitudes will gather in numbers that we can't imagine. You know that you need you. Or as Grandma has said, you need y'all. Somebody turn to somebody else and say, I need you. And this COVID-19 stuff has kept us apart for far too long. And I want to just make sure you know that you need new. This isn't a weird fluke. It's a reality that was written on your heart. You need you. How many of you watched a little more TV than normal over the last 13 weeks? How many of you watched Tiger King? How many of you are embarrassed you watched Tiger King? How many of you bought Netflix for 1 month so that you could simply watch Tiger King? All right, yeah. If you don't know Billy, he's one of our special friends over there. He's actually embarrassed for me because that's exactly what I did. But we're not talking about Tiger King today. You watched it too? Yeah, see, you liked it, Billy? Billy and I watched it. Here's what I watched, one of those things that I watched over this COVID-19. ESPN documentary, 10-part series, 5 Sundays, 1 hour each part. Anybody know what I'm talking about? How many of you watched The Last Dance, right? There's a few things you need to know about The Last Dance. It's about Michael Jordan and the 1998 Chicago Bulls. A couple things you need to know about Michael Jordan that I was reminded of while watching The Last Dance. This one I'm forever grateful. Michael Jordan made bald cool. Amen. Where's my bald friends today? Not only did he make bald cool, not only is he arguably one of the best, if not the best basketball player ever, Michael Jordan was a loser until Scottie Pippen came around, until Dennis Rodman came around, until Luke Longley from Australia came around, till John Paxson came around. See, I learned from The Last Dance the reality that we see in the book of Revelation, that none of us will move to victory until we have a team around us. And you know what it has been to be alone or to be isolated for 13 days. And even though this is weird, it's wonderful because you need you. How many of you parents basically had to tie your children up at home in knots so that they wouldn't sneak out just to go hang out with their friends? The reality is, friends, not only did Michael Jordan need you and people around him, you need people around you so that you can have victory in life. And I am thankful that we are back together. Are you thankful that we're back together? Yeah. But it wasn't just Michael Jordan I watched, and it wasn't just Tiger King I watched. It was Lance Armstrong I watched. Did anybody else watch the Lance Armstrong documentary on ESPN? Was anybody else surprised that ESPN all of a sudden allows language like that? It's ESPN, and they were allowing all kinds of language. But that's not what I'm talking about. Lance Armstrong, in a solo sport, cycling, won the Tour de France 7 times while doped up on drugs, his own admission. But even in a solo sport while doped up on drugs, he too was a loser until something happened. His team came around him. Without the team, Lance Armstrong would have been nothing. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know because many of you have been longing for these moments when we could finally gather again, because you were made to be like those who were in heaven when it says a great multitude gathered, so large a number that they couldn't even count. Somebody say, that's thing 1. Thank you. There's 3 things. Thing 2. After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Every nation, tribe, people, and language. I'm just going to remind you, when you participate, you remember better. So repeat after me. Every nation, tribe. Got to go a little faster. I know it's been 13 weeks, but we can do this, right? Try it again. Every nation, tribe, people, language. Try it again. Nation, tribe, people, nation, every. Here's the thing. when we gather, when we get to glory, it'll be a diverse bunch of people. Here's what I know about the river. I really don't think, and I think there's some factual data behind this, that there is not a more diverse congregation than us, socioeconomically. There aren't any churches in Kalamazoo, and I'm not boasting in this, I'm just praising the Lord that He's entrusted us with this reality, where there's such a gap in diverse people across the socioeconomic scale. We got people who make a ton of money, we got people who make no money, and we got people right smack dab in the middle. And it's one of the things you love about this church, isn't it? Yeah. And it's one of the things that makes me proud to call you my church home. Every nation, every tribe, every people, and every language. You know, when we started the river, we opened our doors in September of 2004. We began working behind the scenes in 2003 to get this thing rolling. And when I was moving to form a launch team, I went to one of my friends who's a pastor and is an African American, and I said to my friend, I said, hey, do you want to start a church with me? And he had good reason. There was all kinds of things going on in his world. He looked me in the eye and says, thanks for the offer, but no thanks. But it was burning on your lead pastor's heart at the very beginning to have a racially diverse congregation. Don't worry about this awkward person driving by. They're going to be embarrassed right now, okay? So everybody look this way. Everybody look away. Just kidding. We can wave at them. The river right now has two values. Does anybody know what those two values are? Who can name them out? Anybody? Brad knows. He knew at the first service too. Anybody else? Can anybody else tell me one of them? Did you say intimacy? Way to go. What's the second one? It rhymes with Hersey. Mercy. Way to go, Venus, your team. We pared down our values to intimacy and mercy to kind of align what Jesus said the two greatest commandments were, to love God and love people. And it was good and right for us to streamline it, because basically out of that all things come. But you need to know that at the beginning of the river, we had another value stated in all of our literature on our website, and that value was diversity ethnically. That was hard for me to say. Ethnically, there it is. And so when we were looking to hire a youth pastor years ago, before Mark came on the scene, we drove down to Atlanta, Georgia, and we hired a guy. Anybody remember Corey's name? Anybody? Because we longed to have a racially diverse congregation, and in order for that to happen, there will need to be diversity amongst the leadership. We learned something, though, when you hire a guy from Atlanta. The winters in Michigan are different than the winters in Atlanta. And so things didn't work out. And so when I read in my Bible that the multitude gathers from every nation, tribe, people, and language, I'm reminded of the roots of this congregation, and I'm reminded that we've got work to do. Because we are diverse socioeconomically. Way to go. But I realize that we might have gotten away from one of our first missions, and that is to become a church that is racially, ethnically diverse. Y'all might not have noticed, but there's some racial stuff going on in our country right now. You might think it began in Minnesota, but I'm telling you it began probably 400 years ago in the 1600s, where those in the power oppressed those who weren't. And as I've been watching, as you've been watching, what's been shaking out racially in our country, it's reminded me that the river was put here with a mission to do something about ethnic diversity in Kalamazoo. I've heard many people say during these days, well, I don't see color. Well, I think that should be something we set aside, because we should see culture and we should see color. Because God made us different, and to say you don't see those things is to ignore the beautiful richness that God has given to us. I think maybe we should say we don't see race because, quite frankly, there's only one race, and it's the human race. And I believe that this part of God's church has been lacking because we've not seen the ethnic and cultural diversity that He put upon our hearts so many years ago. So here's what I know. I don't know. I know that I don't know. And I'm told that's a good place to begin. But I know that if we don't call the spade a spade, if we don't speak to the reality, if we don't say this is what it is, this what it is won't become that which it's meant to be. And so I'm wondering if you can help be a part of that solution. Because the Bible's clear, when we get to glory, it's every nation, tongue, and tribe will gather. Now they did one thing. So I'll be honest, I said this too at the first service, was talking to Brad about this the other day. I usually preach from my laptop, right? I have a Bible, online, as most of you do. I haven't actually preached from a Bible for probably 15 years now. And this is the Bible I used to preach from. A weird thing has happened in the last 15 years. The print in this Bible has gotten smaller. I'm having a hard time seeing this stuff, right? Fortunately, my sunglasses are prescription. Maybe I'm reading this right. The one thing that this great, diverse multitude did is they gathered and they passed the offering plate. Amen? Maybe I'm reading that one wrong. It says they cried out in a loud voice. They cried out in a loud voice. Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. When this great multitude of diverse people gathered, they could only do one thing, and it had nothing to do with the offering plate. It had nothing to do with fancy church stuff. It had one thing, and that one thing was to lift their voice praising the King of Kings. So here's what we decided when we were talking about how to do this first wonderfully weird service back. We thought we should major in what they majored in minor in what I major in, and that is speaking. So you know what you're doing now? You're watching me get out of the way so that they can lead us into worship like they did and will do and we will do in glory, and that is to lift your voice in song. So consider yourselves invited to join the heavenly host, to join all those who went before us and who will come after us in glory, to sing and lift your song and your voice unto the Lord.